I never expected a quiet driveway to turn into a war zone. But that's exactly what happened when Karen from across the street decided my Jeep was suddenly up for grabs. It all kicked off on a bright, lazy afternoon, the kind that typically drifts by with neighbors waving across fences and kids zooming past on bikes. Karen apparently had other plans. She marched over to my driveway like she owned the curb, every step loud with certainty. In a voice that carried down the block, she announced that the Jeep should belong to her, or, more precisely, to her daughter. I stared, convinced I'd misheard. "You're giving my daughter that Jeep," she said, pointing at my brand-new Rubicon as if it were merely a prop parked for show. "It's only fair. She needs it." I kept my voice steady and told her the truth. The Jeep was my property, registered to me, insured, and not leaving. Karen didn't want to hear it. She whipped out her phone and dialed 911, insisting the police needed to intervene because, in her telling, theft was underway. Within minutes, the street hummed with gossip. Neighbors started peeking out of windows and gathering at the edge of lawns. Karen paced, phone tight in her hand, rehearsing her story for anyone willing to listen. When the officers turned up, I made a call of my own. Karen didn't know I wasn't an ordinary owner. I had documentation and backing that made her claims crumble. I told the officers calmly that the vehicle was mine, legal, and all supported by state paperwork. Then I dropped the twist. I mentioned, casually, that the state attorney had reviewed my case. The change in Karen's face was immediate. Her swagger blinked out and the confidence that had fueled her march vanished. The officers were courteous but unmistakably firm. They asked Karen to step back and let the facts do the talking. She sputtered and tried to justify herself. But every protest she made was undone by the stack of papers I held, the very forms the state attorney had signed off on. She'd come expecting confrontation, drama, maybe even triumph. Instead, she was confronted with clear, indisputable legal reality. My Jeep stayed put in the driveway, polished and gleaming in the sunlight as if mocking the attempt. Karen finally slunk away, muttering something about next time, though everyone around knew there wouldn't be one. As the police left, shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all, I realized this had never really been about the vehicle. It was about boundaries, entitlement, and how far someone will go when they believe a possession is theirs for the taking. Her retreat didn't last. The very next morning she returned, angrier, sterner, full of an entitlement that felt aggressive. She parked her car directly across my driveway, blocking me in like she wanted to stake a claim on the entire block. Her daughter, whom I'd never met, sat beside her looking baffled. Karen's stunt was no longer just about owning a Jeep. It was a show, a public display of dominance she'd clearly rehearsed. I stepped outside, calm but bracing for the spectacle. "Morning, Karen," I said, forcing a polite smile. She snorted. "I see you brought backup," she huffed, ignoring any niceties. "This is my daughter's Jeep now. You don't understand." She repeated it like a mantra, as though repetition could make it true. "I called the police yesterday. They didn't stop me because they don't see the big picture." I took a breath and raised my paperwork like a shield. "The big picture is simple," I replied. "This Jeep belongs to me. It's registered to my name, insured under my policy, and every step I took was lawful. You might want to check with the state attorney before you keep making claims." Her jaw dropped, and I could see her brain working, trying to find a counter. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to be so prepared. Most people assume loudness and drama will push things their way. Karen had miscalculated. She began to mutter under her breath. Then, as though reality had a voice of its own, her daughter leaned forward in the passenger seat. "Mom, maybe we should just go," she said softly. The girl's small, reasonable voice cut through the chaos. I couldn't help but notice the contrast between the daughter's clarity and Karen's frantic insistence. But Karen wasn't finished. She marched up to the front of the Jeep and tried to intimidate me physically. I stayed composed. I knew any show of anger would only escalate things and make her look worse. My calm presence did the work that my paperwork already had. It let the law and reason speak louder than the theatrics. Neighbors watched now, peeking through curtains and stepping onto porches, and Karen's boldness was about to be exposed in front of an audience that saw more than she intended. When she finally climbed back into her car, she was red-faced and furious. But the look her daughter shot her said everything. Even she could sense this was wrong. I could see the mental gears turning in Karen's head. This wasn't finished. Any future attempts would be met with facts, copies of documents, and the state attorney's involvement if needed. What she didn't realize was I'd already anticipated further moves. I'd prepared for the possibility that she would come back. And I had plans to shut down her theatrics without getting drawn into an ugly scene. Sure enough, a few days later I caught sight of her hanging at the end of my drive. Phone clutched like a weapon. This time her plan was bolder. She didn't just want the Jeep. She wanted to spin the story so she'd look like the victim and paint me as the bad guy. She believed she could manipulate public opinion and the officers with a performance, but she underestimated how ready I was. I was out watering the garden when she strutted up, blocking my driveway yet again. "I'll take that Jeep for my daughter today," she announced, repeating the line as if sheer repetition could turn it into reality. Her tone was sharp, the arrogance of someone who assumes rules don't apply to them. I set the hose down, faced her, and kept my voice level. "Karen, you do realize that repeatedly trying to take someone else's property can have legal consequences?" I asked. "Especially when the state attorney is already aware of the situation." For a split second, her face lost color before she plastered on indignation. "You're bluffing," she spat. "The law will side with a mother." I smiled because I knew the truth was stronger than any bluff. Calmly, I swung open the driver's side door of my Jeep and gestured to the seat. "See this Jeep? It's registered to me, insured to me, and your daughter has no claim on it. Not now, not ever." Karen's temper snapped. She stormed up and down the driveway, muttering threats under her breath and, predictably, dialed the police again. But this time I was ahead of her. I had already contacted the precinct in advance, explained her repeated harassment, and made sure the state attorney's documentation was on file. When the officers pulled up, Karen dove into her performance, spinning her story with wild hand gestures. But the officers didn't buy it. They'd been briefed. My paperwork, neat and airtight, shut down every word she threw out. The look on her face as her arrogance crumbled was unforgettable. Neighbors who'd gathered to watch weren't just seeing a petty argument, they were witnessing entitlement lose to hard facts. Her daughter, quiet in the passenger seat, looked embarrassed but oddly relieved, as if she finally saw through the chaos. Karen's retreat that day looked like something out of a soap opera. She muttered about next time, but her words carried no weight. The Jeep sat shining in my driveway, a silent trophy to patience, preparation, and the law. Still, I knew Karen wasn't finished. She had one more card to play, her boldest move yet. A week later, early in the morning, she showed up again. I could tell by her posture and the rehearsed look on her face that she'd planned this spectacle. This wasn't just another tantrum, this was her attempt at a full-blown showdown. She parked aggressively across my driveway, slammed her door, and stormed toward me like a challenger entering an arena. "You think you can keep this Jeep from my daughter forever?" she shouted, her voice trembling between rage and desperation. "I'm not leaving until you hand it over." I didn't move. I stepped forward with my keys in one hand and paperwork in the other. "Karen, this Jeep is mine. You've tried intimidation. You've involved the police. And yet here you are, repeating the same mistakes. Let me make it simple. There is no legal way your daughter can ever claim this vehicle." Her face flushed scarlet. "You're lying. I've seen people get things taken for their kids," she barked. I shook my head and quietly made another call. "Officers, she's here again attempting to take my Jeep. The state attorney already has the documentation. Please respond before this escalates further." Almost instantly, squad cars rolled in. Karen's facade cracked wide open. She scrambled to explain, waving her arms and pleading, but the officers weren't fooled. They had already been briefed. My paperwork was ironclad, and the law was clear. Her entitlement had finally slammed headfirst into reality. I decided to end things with finality. I opened the Jeep door once more, gesturing toward it. "Everything here is legal, Karen. Nothing you say will change that. If you persist, you'll be looking at serious consequences." Her daughter sat silently in the passenger seat, eyes wide, her expression saying what she couldn't out loud. She knew I was right. Karen's fight fizzled out. Her voice dropped to a mutter, something about next time, but the crowd of neighbors knew this was the end. Her repeated attempts had been dismantled piece by piece, by law, by preparation, and by calm persistence. As she drove away, I realized this wasn't just about a Jeep. It was about drawing a line and holding it, no matter how loudly someone tried to cross it. The Jeep gleamed in the sunlight, untouched, unclaimed, and a reminder of how far entitlement can push a person who believes rules don't apply to them. From that day forward, Karen never tried again. My Jeep stayed exactly where it belonged, my driveway stayed peaceful, and my patience had proven stronger than her arrogance. If you enjoyed this wild HOA showdown, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more unbelievable stories, and drop a comment telling me, what would you do if someone tried to take your Jeep? Your support helps bring more outrageous real-life tales to life.